I audible to everyone? Am I audible? Let me know in the chats. We're just waiting for a couple of people to join in, and also from my group because I'm just connecting into the meeting right now. So, can you guys hear me? So sorry about that. Am I visible and audible now?
Not visible, but audible. Yes. Not visible. Yes.
Visible as well? Alright, cool. Okay, so let's begin. Let's get into it. Today we are reading chapter 6 of the book, page number 199. So in the last session we'd covered like from chapter 6 from page 189 to 199, about 10 pages, which is our usual speed. But something really interesting has happened, so I'm just going to take a quick summary of what we've read so far just in this chapter. So this guy, this complete fucking douchebag, Arthur Mason Tippets Jackson, has been killed, and this guy is probably one of the worst people who ever lived. Okay, not one of the worst people who ever lived, but it's just the way he is painted in this book, and like the way that Sampath has narrated his character. I shouldn't say his character. It feels like fiction, but it's not fiction, is it? It's the the anecdotes that Sampath has given really are very very incriminating for this man. So this guy was a district collector in Nasik since 1888, and he had learned Sanskrit, and he was very endearing to the natives. So the natives really loved him because he made an effort to learn their language and culture, etc. And he was very popular amongst them. Okay, and as a result of which, I believe he was promoted and was a very a British official at a very high position. And but in reality he had done like absolutely despicable acts. So for and he was extremely staunchly against any freedom movement in India. uh, there were stories, rumors about how he had beaten an Indian peasant to death and then told everyone that, oh, he just left the village because he got diarrhea. What? um, and the fake documents were manufactured as well to prove that this guy had diarrhea. And uh, on another occasion, he also he rounded up a crowd of young men singing Vande Mataram, or basically chanting Vande Mataram, and he rounded them up for like basically anti-national activity, and they were all sent to jail and were tortured in prison basically because of on his orders. And he also ensured that when Baba Rao was arrested and was sentenced to transportation for life, that he be handcuffed and paraded on the streets, so that people could like ridicule him and basically to try and suppress um, any kind of patriotic movement. And so as a result of this, his like going to such extremities, I would say, and his wantonly cruel attitude, he was executed by three members of the Abhinav Bharat. Uh, one of them was Kanhare. So, uh, right, Kanhare was a member of the Abhinav Bharat, and he had executed this guy along with two other people. So he was acting with it was him and two other members of the Abhinav Bharat who had conspired to assassinate Jackson. And all three of them were executed, of course. But all along, when this was happening in India, Vinayak was in Paris. So we read in the last chapter that he was extremely broken. He had hit rock bottom. His personal life was completely in shambles because his brother was arrested, and his son had died. His professional life was completely in shambles because his bar license had been denied. He had nowhere to go. Dhingra had just been executed, right? Sentenced to be hung as well. So he had hit rock bottom, and it felt like everything that he was doing to try and liberate India was not working, or it was backfiring, and it was not having the result that he wanted. Eventually, he had to leave London because even within London, he could not find a place to stay because Scotland Yard and criminal intelligence detectives were tailing him throughout the city. Even when he left the city, he could not find proper boarding and lodging. As a result of which, he started getting, things started getting hard, and in a brief moment of weakness, he got homesick, and he because of, I suppose, his mental state, he also contracted bronchitis, severe bronchitis, and it was recommended that he leave England and go to Paris, where Shyamji and Madam Bikaji Kama were there to receive him. He's there in Paris. He goes to Paris. He's there's a brief moment in his life where I suppose he has access to worldly comforts, and soon he realizes that people have started talking uh, behind his back, saying that this guy is just orchestrating all of these movements, he's orchestrating all of these assassinations, but he doesn't actually have the guts to go and do anything himself on the ground. And this had really hit home for Vinayak because he was hearing that other people of the Abhinav Bharat were talking about him this way. This hurt him because there was a point when he had talked about Shyamji that way, and he had expressed his opinion to Shyamji, because all in the book we see that all Shyamji has done is written articles and petitioned the government, and no matter how fiery your articles, or no matter how um, uh, I don't know, logically strong your petitions, no matter how well written they are, it's still not the same as doing real work on the ground. They're still only just petitions, they're still only just articles. And so the sentiment you know, the sentiment amongst all of the freedom fighters and revolutionaries of the time was that this man who is masterminding everything else, is everything that is going on, is happy to put other people's life at stake, but not stake his own. Okay, so this really got to him, and he also realized that it's about time that his country is in shackles, and it doesn't bode well for him to be in Paris, enjoying himself and living comfortably. He should be in London, carrying out and masterminding more revolutionary activity. And then that's exactly what he does. Everybody, Bikaji Kama, Madam Bikaji Kama and Shyamji, they both try to convince him that do not go to London, because if you do, you're going to get arrested. And once you get arrested, then, or like, there's no telling what the British government might do. But he decides to go anyway, and that is where we are at on the book in the book. Meanwhile, as he's going to London, simultaneously Sampath is also narrating the story of how the Scotland Yard and criminal intelligence in India as well is trying to frame a case against him. So far, all they have is fiery articles, but they want to make sure that they have something really solid against him, so that this case is not dropped. Like, so they want to collect a very strong case against him, so he's not let go of by the end of the trial. So if, of course, at the end of the trial, if the court finds him not guilty, then it's going to be very embarrassing for the British government. And with that object in mind, they're trying to build a case, as best as they can. And in these circumstances, he goes to England. All right. Now we start from page 199, but I am going to start reading from number 198, so that we have some sense of actually 197 last line, so that we have some sense of continuity and we know what happened. Now, like I said, Vinayak has just taken the decision of going back to London, and he's enumerating the reasons for why he has done so, or why he's decided to do so. Alright, I read from page number 197 of the book. I hope you guys have it. The moment of epiphany came on a bright sunny morning in Paris, when he was taking a walk in the garden as per his doctor's advice. Swans and ducks swam merrily in the ponds, water lilies had just bloomed, and the skies were a clear blue. The scene seemed straight out of a painting. Reclining on a bench there, Vinayak pulled out the newspaper and was horrified to read about death sentences awarded to Kanhare, Karve, and Deshpande, the three people who assassinated Jackson. He was overcome by emotion and cursed himself for enjoying walks in the park while his compatriots were facing the worst tribulation. As someone who used to preach that one must put everything aside for the cause of freedom, he felt repulsed at his inaction. The time of reckoning and leading by example had come. He decided that he would head back to London, even if it was at the cost of his life and liberty. There was another reason for Vinayak's decision. He believed that London would provide him scope for fighting on behalf of the accused in India, even though he did not know Karve, Kanhare, and Deshpande. London, he thought, was famous as having given asylum to many exiles and revolutionaries. Orsini, the Italian revolutionary who shot Napoleon III, Karl Marx, and many others had lived in London unmolested. London should be safe for him also. He hurried back and told Shamji, Madam Kama, and Sardar Singh Rana about his decision, and they tried their best to persuade him against it. They had a reason for doing so. The investigation of the arrested persons in the Jackson murder case was slowly leading back to Vinayak and his activities in London. The government had already been wary of him, and after Baba Rao's arrest, they wanted to foist a case on Vinayak in order to extradite him. The leads that many witnesses gave were helping the government create a watertight case against Vinayak. Lord George Sydenham Clark, a former British Army officer and the new governor of Bombay from October 1907, was determined to prosecute Vinayak, whom he considered one of the most dangerous men that India had produced. Official correspondence mentions that a case should be put up against Savarkar even though it's not very strong. If he is convicted of being a member of a conspiracy, the second conviction is by no means unprovable. If he is acquitted, of course, the whole petition drops. A lot of information had been gathered about him and his writings, but it was felt that these were not enough to nail him in a court of law. The official correspondence, hence, also drives home a point of caution and also the need to build a case that did not allow any room for a second trial so that he could be convicted in the first attempt itself. And this is what the correspondence read. It should be clearly understood that there is a chance of acquittal on charge of abetment of murder, whereas in all probability, sentence on conspiracy charge will be transportation for life, which would be probably maximum on conviction on other charges. If such a sentence now given effect might actually be to induce clemency at a second trial, political effect of second trial would be most unfortunate, as vindictiveness of government would be alleged. So they are saying that basically, if on one charge you convict him, that charge is weak. Okay, we don't have enough evidence. However, if you convict him on this other charge, we might most likely be able to, get hold of him, and we'll be able to nail him, so to speak. And because the thing is, if you take the weak charge, even though it is slightly more severe, and you convict him on it, then and if there is not enough evidence and if the petition drops, and then you take out another charge against him, that will show that the government is being vindictive against one person and is targeting one person, right? So we need to make it appear as if he is a criminal and not that he is the victim of his circumstance and he is being targeted by the government for no reason, right? This was the approach. Now, Sampath writes, Lord Montgomery, a special magistrate at Nasik, was appointed to record evidence, particularly to build a prima facie case against Vinayak and have him extradited. A complaint was filed against Vinayak in Montgomery's court on 17th January 1910, and on 8th February 1910, a warrant was issued against him, charging him with 5 offences under the Indian Penal Code. Offence 1: waging war or abetting the waging of war against the king in India. Conspiring in contravention of Section 121A of the Indian Penal Code to deprive the king of the sovereignty of British India or a part of it. Number 3. Procuring and distributing arms in London in 1908, thus abetting the murder of Mr. A.M.T. Jackson, collector of Nasik, which occurred at a local theatre on 21st December 1909. Number 4. Procuring and distributing arms in London in 1908 and otherwise waging war against the king from London. Offence number 5. Delivering seditious speeches in India at Nasik and Pune, January to May 1906, and in London from 1908 to 1909. The warrant was granted against Vinayak in his absence from London on the grounds that these offences came within the Fugitive Offenders Act of 1881. The FOA, or the Fugitive Offenders Act, presumed that the suspect in question had been guilty of a crime and had fled to evade arrest. There were several legal loopholes in the charges. First, Vinayak was not a fugitive when he left India for Britain, nor had he been previously charged, evaded arrest, or ever been imprisoned. He had come to Britain like any other Indian student in a legal manner to pursue his law studies and with a scholarship supporting him. But the British government realized that the only way Vinayak could be extradited was by producing charges of an unresolved and unrecorded crime in India. To execute this, all that the government could come up with were Vinayak's speeches of a seditious nature made in India nearly 5 years ago before his departure for Britain. However, the Indian government could have charged Vinayak and arrest him on sedition charges even back then, given that he had built a case against him for sedition in India by raking up a non-existent crime based on forced testimonies of several amnesty witnesses. The reason for the same was that sedition was near obsolete in Britain, but given its prominence in India, if Vinayak got convicted for that in India, the sentence could be the harshest. It was easier to secure jury convictions based on sedition in India, and hence an extradition was paramount. As Janki Bakle puts it, sedition trials per se were no less politically explosive in India than in England, but the outcome could be guaranteed because the juries could be counted on to convict. The legal definition of sedition made no real separation between the word and the deed, intention and implementation, representation and reality. In India, sedition became the preemptive as well as the ex post facto legal mechanism that allowed the colonial state, in anticipation of a dangerous act, to proscribe all thought, writing, or language that might produce it. At the same time, sedition was also allowed for a post event roundup and arrest of everyone even remotely connected with the actual act, on the grounds that their rhetoric had clearly been the cause of incitement of the natives to agitate against the government. At the moment of its demise in England, because of its association with illiberalism, sedition was reborn in India with colonial occupation as the midwife. Based on the 5 charges against Vinayak, a telegram was dispatched to London with the result that on 22nd February 1910, the Bow Street magistrate granted a provisional warrant of arrest. With Wallinger's intervention, the British managed to secure some partial cooperation from the Paris police. Despite knowing all these facts, Vinayak decided to leave for London. His decision is variously described as rash or honourable, depending upon the perspective of the author. There have been other insinuations too of him having fallen prey to a honey trap Lawrence Margaret, the British agencies had set up for him. The insinuation has no basis and there has been no reference or details available about the lady. These are as wild and contradictory to the other often repeated innuendos about Vinayak that he had been a consumer of opium for years. He was also, although few of his followers were aware of it, a homosexual. Okay. They seem to be made more from a pejorative view of maligning Vinayak and using his personal life, which was his business and none other's, to score political brownie points against him and his actions. In any case, it might be fair to state that Vinayak miscalculated the liberalism of London and also misunderstood his position as a domestic terrorist, not a foreigner. Shamji warned him several times and also wrote about this. We felt that he was no longer safe in England. After repeated appeals, he was at last persuaded to come to Paris, and we were delighted to know that our dear friend was safely in our midst, free from the clutches of his relentless enemies. Alas, our pleasure was short lived. A few months ago, much against our earnest advice, he took it into his head to return to England. Amongst other things, we drew his attention to a special danger to which he was exposed, inasmuch as two of his brothers had already been entrapped by the British government, one transported for life and the other on the way to receive a like sentence. The probability was that the alien oppressors of our country would take good care to put him out of the way, fearing lest an active and capable young man of his temperament might wreak havoc, might wreak a righteous vengeance. Victoria Station, London, 13th March 1910. Sorry, guys, 1 second. Okay. Vinayak had promised to meet Shamji and others one last time before leaving for London, but he unexpectedly left France on Sunday, 13th March 1910. He left behind a letter expressing sorrow at not being able to see them before leaving and thanked them profusely for their generosity. Vinayak left Paris by train to Calais and crossed the English Channel. There he boarded another boat train from New Haven Port for London. At 7 p.m., as the boat train steamed into Victoria Station, Vinayak knew that he was being shadowed. Interestingly, Miss Perinben Nauroji, Dadabhai Nauroji's daughter, granddaughter, who was in Paris and helping the revolutionaries in manufacturing bombs, was traveling with him. But the police did not notice or catch her. Just as Vinayak stepped out of the train, a battery of detectives and police officials pounced on him. Chief Inspector John McCarthy and Inspector E. John Parker of and Inspector E. John Parker of Scotland Yard, who had pursued the case triumphantly, cried, "Here he is, he's here." Vinayak merely smiled and said, "Yes, it's me, I'm Savarkar." He was taken to the waiting room where the arrest warrant of the Bombay High Court demanding his extradition was read out to him. He smiled and replied, "Yes, sir. Doubtless the case would prove very interesting." Thereafter, he was formally taken into the custody of the Bow Street police. Searching his trunk, the police discovered 2 copies of his book, The Indian War of Independence, 1857, 7 copies of the pamphlet Choose, O Princes, 1 copy of Mazzini, and several newspaper articles. Though lack of warm clothing and the English cold awoke him a few times in the night that he spent at the police station, he slept well and without a care. The next day, Vinayak was produced at Bow Street Police Court before the Chief Magistrate, Sir Albert de Rutson. The court was crowded with spectators who had come to watch the high profile proceedings. Although it was announced that the proceedings would be formal, there were many people in court, the greater portion of them being well dressed young Indians. Vinayak's counsel, Reginald Vaughan of Gray's Inn, put forward an application for his client's bail. Vaughan addressed the magistrate, saying, and he says as follows: "There is very considerable doubt whether there is any authority to send this man back to India. This, however, is a question which your worship, it should be lordship, but which your worship will consider later. I ask in the meantime that this man shall be admitted to bail. The offence is of a political nature, really. Whether in law or not is another matter." VVS Iyer stood solidly behind Vinayak in these trying times and even engaged Vaughan. Vinayak was refused bail after the preliminary hearings. No bail at all, exclaimed Vaughan, to which the Chief Magistrate said, not until I know more about the case. On 18th March, H.B. Simpson, the Under Secretary to the Secretary of State for India, sent an official correspondence regarding this. I am directed by Secretary Mr. Winston Churchill to acquaint you, for the information of the Secretary of State for India, that Vinayak Savarkar has been arrested in pursuance of a warrant issued under the Fugitive Offenders Act 1881 on the information of the Metropolitan Police, and having been brought before a magistrate at Bow Street Police Court on the 14th instant, was remanded for 7 days on a charge of sedition and abetment of murder committed within the jurisdiction of the Indian government. Almost immediately, a telegram was wired from the Viceroy's office in Shimla to the India office in London. Government anxious to, and the telegram read as follows: Government anxious to proceed against Savarkar. His brother Ganesh has been convicted under Section 121 IPC. We agree that this is desirable and propose to send to London an Indian police officer having intimate knowledge of conspiracy case here. We are advised that the best evidence against Savarkar will be obtained from Sikhs, and therefore have selected Sikh Deputy Superintendent Dayal Singh Yani. We propose that he should receive full pay of rupees 400 a month and present allowance of rupees 100 with travelling expenses and 10 shillings a day subsistence allowance in England. We request your sanction by telegraph to deputation on these terms. I'm not sure why the best evidence would be obtained from Sikhs, or why they have that point of view, but I should mention that previously in the book, Sampath does say that Savarkar had a fascination with Sikh history, and in fact, when he was in Paris recuperating from his illness, he had actually written a book, a compilation of Sikh history called The History of Sikhs. Unfortunately, the history of the Sikhs, and unfortunately, the manuscript could not be published because all of the copies were lost because of various circumstances. So, he's always been fascinated with Sikh history. Perhaps that's the reason. Iyer met Vinayak in prison on 15th March and on several occasions thereafter. He was his messenger and a window to the outside world. On the same day, he also wrote to Shyamji conveying the details of the arrest, initial hearings, and his engagement of a counsel that could help them prove Vinayak's innocence beyond a shadow of doubt. Iyer said, almost prophetically, that the prospect of transportation for life to Andaman looms large for Vinayak, and they must do all that they can to prevent his extradition to India. He writes about meeting Vinayak in jail. This morning I saw Savarkar, and he was the same as ever, except that we had to converse through the iron bars. But I feel it deeply, too deeply, that he should be interned in the English jail, a lion in the toil of his hunter. He said that jail superintendent, etc., treated him with due attention and care, and that he had nothing to complain under the circumstances. I know you as well as Mrs. Shyamji would feel so much to find that but the day before yesterday he was with you, safe, and today... There is no use crying over spilt milk. We must do our best to see that he is not sent to India. If once he is sent, we shall see no more of him, and one of the dearest and most devoted sons of the motherland would be rotting away in cells of a malarious island. It was pathetic when Savarkar said this morning, if he were to be taken to Andaman, he would have the happiness of seeing his elder brother. I hope that melancholy sort of happiness will not be his, but that he will be released and will work out the salvation of his country according to his lights. Iyer also wrote about collecting funds for Vinayak's defense, and that nearly 200 sterling pound might be needed for the legal fees. Shyamji replied promptly and expressed his deep consternation on the misery that had befallen Vinayak, and one he had brought upon himself despite their advice. He also sent a cheque for 10 sterling pounds to aid Vinayak in his hour of crisis. On 20th March, Vinayak was sent to Brixton Prison, situated at Jebb Avenue in London. Iyer visited him regularly. Interestingly, Vinayak himself recounts in detail this encounter with Iyer at Brixton Prison from his memoir, written in 1925 from Ratnagiri to condole Iyer's passing away. And Vinayak writes, in 1910, I stood as a prisoner, then only very recently pent up in Brixton, the formidable prison in London. The warder announces visits. Anxiously, I accompany the file of prisoners to the visiting yard. I stand behind the bars, wondering who could have come to call on us, and thus invite the unpleasant attentions of the London police. For to acknowledge our acquaintances from the visitors' box in front of the prison bars was a sure step to eventually get behind them. The visitors are let in. They crowdedly pass out. They crowdedly pass past our window. Presently, one dignified figure enters the box in front of us. It was VVS Iyer. His beard was closely waving on his breast. He was unkempt. He was no longer the neatly dressed fashionable gentleman. His whole figure was transformed with some act of dead. With a heavy heart, we looked into each other's eyes. We knew it would perhaps be the last lot, the gallows or the Andamans, and neither could hold any prospect before me of seeing my friends again. Virendranath Chattopadhyay made nearly 15 visits to the prison, even though he lived in Paris. Niranjan Pal too met Vinayak at Brixton and remonstrated with him for disregarding their objections about leaving Paris, despite knowing what would befall him on reaching London. Vinayak coolly replied that his shoulders were broad enough to bear the consequences. He had the courage of his conviction. David Garnett, who had befriended many Indian revolutionaries in London and was Vinayak's ardent admirer, visited Brixton too. He was grilled by Inspector Parker of Scotland Yard and only then allowed to meet Vinayak. Garnett describes his first meeting with Vinayak. He was perfectly calm and at ease. I discussed his defense and offered to collect money for it and to do anything I could to help him. All he wanted at the moment were some clean collars. The size of his neck was only 13 and a half, the size of a schoolboy. I went practically every week to Brixton Gaol to see Savarkar, taking with me some clean collars and handkerchiefs, and I collected a few pounds for his legal defense. From the confines of jail where the gallows or the Andamans seemed certain, Vinayak penned a long and impassioned will and testament. This was written in the form of a letter to Yeshu Vahini. Vinayak poignantly referred to the happy times they spent together in childhood and youth under the open skies and moonlit nights. How lovingly she had taken care of them as a mother would, the games they played together as children, and the stories they heard and were inspired by. His initiative to begin Abhinav Bharat was not a whimsical spur of the moment decision. He and his countless young comrades had done so with the full knowledge that those who would have life must lose it. And hence, it was better to lose it for one's motherland. He saw the silver lining in the dark clouds that hovered over them. In just a few years of its establishment, so much had happened to Abhinav Bharat and its members. His entire family was in prison. This was cause for cheer, according to Vinayak. It was their action that spurred and aroused the country. It had inspired them to armed struggle, to cast off the beggar's bowl and put her hand on the hilt of her sword. Now his resolve would be put to test. All those innumerable speeches, lectures, writings, and oaths would have to pass the trial of fire. Were those empty words that fell flat in the wake of exacting times? Or would these hard times harden them further, is what needed to be seen. Vinayak asserted that it was on thy altar that I sacrificed my health and my wealth. Neither the longing looks of a young wife vainly waiting for my return, nor the peals of laughter of dear children, nor the helplessness of a sister-in-law stranded and left to starve could hold me back at the call of thy trumpet. His two brothers had also sacrificed all they had, and this was only because they believed the cause to be true and holy. Their family tree might terminate with them, but how would that matter when they had fulfilled their duties for their motherland? Vinayak instilled courage and faith in his Vahini, and as the wife and sister in law of daring patriots, she had the double duty to remain resolute despite the tough tidings. He conveyed his love to his wife and asked her to remain steadfast. The British government was awaiting the papers related to Vinayak's case to arrive from India. The documents finally arrived in mid April 1910. Some of Vinayak's comrades at India House, who were rounded up in London and India, had turned government approvers. The 25-year-old Maratha, an engineer from Gwalior state, Harish Chandra Krishna Rao Koregaonkar, testified that he had gone to London in May 1906 to study engineering and was there for about 3 years. He had not known Vinayak earlier and came to know of him only in November 1906. He had visited India House during the meeting held in honor of Guru Gobind Singh's anniversary and went to stay there for a month in April 1907. Gyan Chand Verma and Madan Lal Dhingra were also residents at the time, and Koregaonkar claimed to have left India House after the Curzon Wiley murder, as he felt it was too dangerous to remain. He spoke about the discussions that Vinayak had with others on the armed struggle as a means to attain independence. He recounted a talk in early 1908 which was titled, "Are We Really Disarmed?" Vinayak gave a lecture in which he articulated that India was actually not disarmed and that there were plenty of arms in the native states that constituted nearly a third of the country. One needed to find innovative ways and means to tap into this cachet and procure them for the freedom struggle movement. I think later pages are going into all the testimonies that were given against Vinayak by these residents of the India House who had turned approvers. I understand that the Zoom connection went a few times. Sorry, I couldn't do anything about it, guys. I'm really sorry about this. I don't know why this is happening. I have no clue. I'll have to look into it after this reading session is over. No, I'm not recording it on Zoom, but everything is recorded and it's going to be available on YouTube, and I'm going to link it on Facebook, where we've got all our videos. I just wanted to know from you guys, what have you made? What do you think? What do you think of what we've read? And this is open to everyone who is watching us on YouTube as well. Share the link. Wow, nice hoodie. Thank you. Share the link for the hoodie in the description. Will do.
Extremely depressed right now, thinking what will happen to him.
Yeah. Also, I wonder why he left Paris. I would think that somebody like
He left because of that murder that had happened, and when he got to know that they have been hanged, the three men.
Yeah, but
So
if all he had to do,
wondered that why is he wasting his life getting recovered from an illness and not joining that movement. I think that is the reason why he left.
like, I get that, but also I feel, I mean, wasn't it slightly foolish, knowing full well that he would have gotten arrested? I mean, merely on a guilt trip. Merely on a guilt trip. I feel like perhaps that's the reason that he is gone, because he just felt really guilty about being comfortable in a nice and plush environment. But
And then he was not afraid to be hanged or to be, himself, because that is what he said while leaving also,
Hmm.
that they are giving
True.
their lives and I am sitting here. I don't care. There is one line in one of the pages that
Yeah,
we have
yeah.
read that he mentions the same.
Yeah, where he's talking about how he's taking walks in the park.
He is actually prepared. That is
Yeah.
where we read.
And he also talks about how making Abhinav Bharat was not a spur of the moment decision. It was something that he had thought out, beforehand. And what I'm trying to understand is that imagine the resolve of somebody who is in school. He was in school when he founded the society, and he had the maturity and the understanding that yes, this society is going to be dangerous, and this is what he should expect out of it. These are not unrealistic expectations, really. What they are preparing the members for is the gallows, and Kalapani. So that's the most astounding thing about his story, is how successful Abhinav Bharat really was, and how young he was when he had established it. I don't think any 15, 16-year-old today would would have the resolve to I don't know, take up a cause like that. Most of us are just arguing about what gender we are at this point. So I think that struggle and hardship like this is completely beyond us, right? If all we're talking about is whether we're boys or girls or whatever. Not to sidetrack from the issue at all. Guy made a mistake in the spur of the moment. He was at his lowest. This was not a calculated move. This was an emotional response. Yeah, his departure from Paris was definitely an emotional response. Uh, but his move to establish Abhinav Bharat was definitely, well, he says it was calculated, so I have to believe him. And but also, his consistency also shows, right? Like, it wasn't as if he establishes a society when he is 15, 16, and then it doesn't continue. He continues to work on it. He continues to give speeches, lectures, study material for all the members, and it becomes successful every single place he goes to. He acquires members everywhere, delivers speeches everywhere, and at the same time manages to fulfill his academic commitments, which were basically his school examinations. So it's really, um, sorry, I'm just reading. Do you need any help? Like, do I need help? Like, what? Okay. No, I'm okay. Thank you, though. When he established Abhinav Bharat, he was motivated and full of life. Now he has hit rock bottom. Yes, that's the sad part. I think the reason that this is it becomes so depressing is because that you see a young boy, a young man, full of energy, and it's eventually sort of beaten out of him, uh, but not entirely. Like, the core of his essence still remains. He's still just as passionate about India's freedom struggle as he was when he first founded Abhinav Bharat. But it's just that, I suppose, age and wisdom and life experiences kind of forge his personality as such. So, um, yeah, this was definitely depressing. What's also interesting is he understands that once he's there, he understands that okay, now I'm going to head to Andaman, and he's fully expecting to see his brother there, because naturally, when somebody like, no justice could have been expected from English courts, right? We already know and understand that they are making a case against him, even if they have to fabricate it, right? But they're going to ensure, even if they have to extradite him on false charges, they're going to do it. So he understands that the government machinery is working against him, and he's going to go to Andaman very, very quickly. What's also interesting is how, I mean, and I don't blame this on anyone because I suppose this is human nature to a great extent, but how quickly do his comrades or do the other residents of India House turn against him? That's the really interesting part. Like, it takes nothing almost to turn them into government approvers. For those of you who don't know what government approvers are, it's basically you're accused of a crime and you uh, uh, turn in favor of the prosecution. So instead of becoming a defense witness, you become a prosecution witness, and you say that, okay, if I rat on somebody else, then I will be pardoned. And that's basically what these people have done. And the Britishers have exacted these testimonies out of the residents of India House. One such testimony we just read was Harish Chandra Krishna Rao Koregaonkar's. So, but it's reasonable, I suppose. I mean, what would any human do in his situation? I guess it would be the same thing, which is that, if you fear torture, you would rat out one of your comrades. And there are reports that I was reading the other day on Wikipedia where I don't know how true this is, but I was reading that Savarkar was put under extremely, extremely harsh conditions in Andaman. He was also sodomized, apparently, but he was constantly writing poems and constantly, composing more and more literature. So people who turned against him didn't think their actions through. Maybe they did. Maybe they did, and maybe they just did not want to be sent to the gallows. Like, you wouldn't know what you could do if your life was under threat. And not just, I don't think this is just death. Perhaps if it were just death, they may not have turned approver, but I think it was also the fear of torture and what Andaman is like. And these punishments are not for short periods of time. We're talking about a decade or 2 or 3. We know for a fact that Savarkar was sentenced to imprisonment for over 50 years in Kalapani, and then he got out after 13. Torture episode spans more than one chapter. It'll hit differently. I don't want it to. I don't want to get there. What's also interesting, one more observation that I have, is how there were rumors about him. So he says that Sampath writes that there are reports which say that the British intelligence had tried to honey trap him by, getting one lady from the British intelligence to seduce him or whatever. But Sampath says that there is no evidence to back this claim up. And he said that along with this, there have been other rumors as well, which again do not have any evidence to back themselves up. Like, there's nothing to suggest that Savarkar was a homosexual. Like, on what ground? He had a child. Was like, what? He had a wife and child. I don't think that there's any reason to suspect that he was gay. I mean, that's the last thing that would come to my head if I were thinking about Savarkar, that he was a homosexual. I mean, not that I'm saying that these things can be pinpointed out in people, but it's just such a wild claim to make. It's not even an accusation. Perhaps at the time it was, because it was stigmatized. But I'm just wondering how this was believed, because apparently it is believed by a lot of people, which is why Sampath feels the need to address it as a rumor in his book. Otherwise it would not, had it not gained as much traction and credibility as we would have, had it not gained as much traction and credibility, we would not have to read about it in this book, and Sampath would not have to dispel it as a myth. And he says these are wild and contradictory to the other often repeated innuendos about Vinayak, that he had been a consumer of opium for years. On I don't know how these rumors came about, and I'm just wondering, is this the criticism against him? Is this what the liberal media continues to cite against him? And then I would be very interested to see in what they produce and why Sampath says there is no evidence to suggest these things. But see, London, as per London, how can that be a crime? It was a crime. You remember even within the Indian Penal Code, homosexuality was counted as bestiality and unnatural sexual intercourse. So it was a crime. And I'm unsure who the rumor was spread by. Was it by Indian patriots? Was it by the British? Was it by Indian politicians who claimed to be patriots but were actually in support of the British and were trying to gain favor with the British? Kalyan says back then, being homo or intersex was a crime. Yeah, even intersex. Can you believe that? Like, what else? His meeting with VVS Iyer is also quite emotional. You know, the psychological toll that it would have, that this entire freedom struggle and movement would have taken on each person involved, um, is just somehow hits differently when Savarkar describes VVS Iyer and talks about how this once fashionable gentleman now sees him in prison, and he has a long beard which is unkempt. He's not groomed himself because there are a million things weighing on him. So I do, and I fully acknowledge the struggles of those who had been sent to Andaman and were in prison, and I suppose they are at a different level altogether. But also for the people who took the revolutionary activities, who took India's freedom struggle seriously, for them the emotional toll would have been massive. And it's also really overwhelming, the force that you're up against, knowing that perhaps you would not receive the fruits of your labor. You would act as a bridge between um, the British Raj and independent Bharat, right? You would never, you would never actually get to reap the benefits of your hard work and of your sacrifice. So, and despite of that, doing everything so unselfishly, I think that's what's really admirable about these people, and just the kind of sacrifice that I don't think our generation could understand, perhaps. So, this rumor sounds like a cheap move that Indian politicians make these days. Also, yeah, you know, there was this recurring theme in the book club that we constantly keep arriving at and discussing, uh, like it, and it just keeps getting reaffirmed by everything that we read, which is that we keep thinking, how did this ruling government come to power? How did the last government, which had been in power for over 50, 60 years, suddenly, you know, lose control of the nation? And deem we always blame it on the government. We always say that, oh no, it was, you know, the Congress government over a period of time, it changed its policies, its attitudes, it got into various scams. And that has never been the case. With everything that I have read so far in this book, all of the articles produced, all of the speeches made by Congress leaders themselves, it seems to me that what happened was that the people changed. The Congress has stayed the same from the day it was founded to the present day. Its policies have remained the same. I don't think any of us can blame the party for uh, making any policy, or, you know, executing like any action which is against its manifesto, or which is against its ideas and um, its ideals, basically. So the party's motive and its beliefs and its ideologies have remained the same since before independence, from the day of its inception. It's us who have changed, and it's our attitudes that have that have voted the party out of power, unfortunately, for them. So, um, yeah, this is the rumor sounds like a cheap move that Indian politicians make these days. Yeah, I think that this is very, very typical of uh, the Congress government. And I don't mean that politically, in the sense that I don't mean to tell you who to vote for or that this party is a bad party or a good party. I don't think that those labels can be affixed on any party in the Indian political scenario today. All I'm saying is, on the basis of what we have read so far, on the basis of the conduct of the Congress leaders back in the day, some of whom were actually supplying the British government information against Savarkar and other members of the Abhinav Bharat society. So I'm not like trying to make, uh, I'm not trying to, throw blame, or I'm not trying to use these adjectives in a blanket manner and without any basis on a particular political party today. I have no such. Uh, everyone knows this. I mean, I have like absolutely no interest in Indian politics as far as at least the party politics goes. Um, this is just what we have read so far, and this has really always been the policy of this particular government. So I'm unsurprised that these rumors have surfaced. All right. Anything else from your end, guys, before I end the session? I'll wait.
This is just one thing.
Yes.
It's completely off topic, actually.
Sure.
Are we eventually going to shift to YouTube for the sessions?
No.
Or are we going to continue on Zoom?
We'll continue on Zoom. For those of you,
Okay.
like so there will be certain premium features of the book club, and there will be like a free version as well. So if you would like to access the free version, you're happy to it's fine for you to continue on YouTube. But if you would like to access the premium versions, which you guys have, we continue on Zoom. But you let me know if this
Okay,
is.
so
Hmm.
this camera angle is super weird. Are you going to change the location of the laptops
Yes.
at some point?
Yes.
Or is it going to continue being
No. It will change because I understand why it
Okay.
because you can't see my face, right? And it's weird to communicate that way.
Yeah, it's very weird. It's like
It's-
I'm talking to the curtain.
And you're talking to my side, and not even my good side.
Yeah.
Like, I should be facing like this. So no, I will change it. Don't worry about that. I will change it. This is just temporary because this is the second live that we have done, and we are experimenting with like how to set up and how many devices we have and all. But it will reduce to just one. Hopefully, I'll be able to do the meeting and the live on just my laptop. And when that happens, it'll be forward facing, like it was previously.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alright, thank you.
Anything else? What did you? I loved your suggestions for the books, you guys. It's really, really interesting. Given me a lot to think about. So for back. So for those of you who don't know, hold on. This disclaimer is longer than the book session, as in. Oh, my disclaimer about how I'm not politically vested. I don't have political motives. Yes, it has to be because I have to like secure myself against any sort of allegations from people saying, "Oh, you want to vote for the BJP or you want to vote for Congress." No, I do not want to vote for any party, and nor do I ask people to vote a certain way. And I have to repeatedly give that disclaimer because people think that with the books I'm reading, I'm trying to make a case for the BJP. No, please. I'm not. That's not the intent at all. I make a case for the Hindu human right, and like try to point out how that we've not always been as weak as history has painted us out to be, and as we're not the version of us that we study in Indian history in our NCRTs is not the case. In fact, me and Tanvi discuss all the time how it blows everyone's mind, like it blows our minds how wrong the NCRT is and how many times there's misinformation and half truths. So that's the nature of the discussion. Like that's where it's going, and it's more oriented towards being like pro Hindu over pro BJP. Unfortunately, the two are so conflated that we repeatedly have to give these disclaimers. Uh, Hello, you should read The Goa Inquisition by A.K. Priolkar. Yes, I've actually heard very good things about the book as well. Unfortunately, I think it might be a little too depressing. Do you guys agree? The Goa Inquisition. If you think
there can't be a happy ending over there.
there can't be a happy ending over there, and if you think this book is going to get you upset, you have a whole other thing coming by reading the Goa Inquisition.
Tisha, I'm actually scared of reading the next few chapters. Like, I'm
Yeah,
not kidding. I'm genuinely scared of reading.
I
the book.
might
It's one
cry.
thing to see it happen on screen; it passes by in a few seconds.
True.
But reading about it, you have to absorb every single word.
Yeah, and it's heavy. It's
Also,
not.
just one more thing. Uh, this whole BJP taking credit for Hinduism, Hindu rights and all, it's not because they are taking credit or they're doing anything. It's because Congress does a splendid job of being anti-Hindu.
Yeah,
Is why people automatically associate anybody being pro-Hindu with BJP.
that's true. They have a very clear
The
policy.
credit.
They have a very clear policy that we are anti-Hindu. I mean, now I don't know what has been going on with them, but the Congress has been very clear in its manifesto, regardless of, sorry, not manifesto, I should say actions and policy decisions, that they are anti-Hindu. Like, that has always been their case. You know, we see that through Gandhi, we see it through all future leaders. So, just listen to Sanjeev Sanyal's latest interview on Times Now about his new book on revolutionaries. It will shatter the myths about revolutionaries and the political scenario back then. Yeah, I would love to. In fact, Sanjeev Sanyal is great. No, I think we could read him next. Right?
Yeah, he writes very well.
He writes really well. Yeah. Alright, guys, I think this is.
Also, book recommendations when we were reading India That Is Bharat, and this is like, there were a lot of great recommendations when we were doing India That Is Bharat too. So the theme automatically influences people's recommendations.
That's true. That's true. I had noticed that. But I'll tell you what, like, I am more interested now, after India That Is Bharat specifically, I'm more interested now in reading like storytelling sort of books, you know, history, but told as a story. Because I don't want to sit and read, like, it's great. India That Is Bharat is great. It makes you think. It's educational, but it is so heavy. It's so heavy. And it's dry. After a certain point, it just gets difficult to get through the whole thing. And remember when we were speeding up at the end because we just could not come to a conclusion. And the worst part is that, like, the book sort of leads you on with like a little treat that, you know, oh look, I have a solution to the problem, perhaps, or at least that is the.
He said that. He said that.
Did he say that? Did he say that?
He said that I will answer all. He actually framed questions like, oh, you must be wondering this, and I was like, oh yes, yes. How does he know?
How does he know?
He says that I'll answer them at the end of the book. And I was like, you did not answer any question.
You did not
No
answer what?
question. Like book organization करना है, ठीक है करना. अब क्या
Oh.
करें? I'm sorry, sir. We have answers.
Yeah, that was our complaint from the book actually. That towards the end, we're not finding a solution, and it's so frustrating.
औकात नहीं है उतनी.
It's so frustrating. It was so frustrating because he got all the problems exactly right, okay, and he got all of the questions in the reader's mind exactly right, and we thought surely if he has gauged all of these things, he may probably be providing an answer, and I don't blame him for it. Okay, I'm not saying that it was a bad book or it shouldn't be read. It should definitely be read. If you can read it, please read it, because every Indian should. It really does open your mind, like in a whole on a whole other level. The only issue was that once you understand the problem, you automatically start to look for a solution and you hope that the book provides it to you, but you don't see it. And maybe that's coming in the second part, but like again, I'm a little bit reluctant to pick up the second part for only that reason. I know it's going to be educational and I know it's going to be a good read. Not a waste of time, that much I can say for as a certainty. But it does get heavy. Call JST and tell him this. Yeah, okay. Tisha said she wants to get Vikram Sampath for an interview. Might as well try JST also. Call JST and tell him what? So you don't give any answers in your book. He'll say.
You don't even ab jawab do. Like you're holding your hostage now.
I'm not. No.
JST at gunpoint, like you said you will answer. Where are the answers? जवाब दो अभी.
नहीं ये नहीं हो सकता यार. He'll be like भाई I'm a lawyer and this is not my job. ये historians को करना चाहिए. Technically our humanities students should be doing this.
Give us a lecture for half an hour and then there will be no answer in that. Like, okay, thank you sir, thank you sir.
Okay, Chinmay Jadhav says, hello, you should read the. Oh, sorry, I already read this. BJP wants to play the long game of keeping the Hindu problem simmering so that they can win every time. Hindus should put pressure on BJP to get the civilization job done. I wholeheartedly agree. Yes, 100% they should. But I don't think like Hindus themselves have so many intersectional divides. Yeah, it's difficult for the community to come together, and I think the party knows that. He answered some in his talks available on YouTube. Yeah, GST did answer some of those questions, but like I was expecting a little bit more from the book. I don't know, for some reason I was. Not again, I'm just like prefacing that again and again. It's a good book. It's a great book. Okay? But many questions remain unanswered. So, for example, one of the themes that he repeatedly talks about is coloniality in the constitution. How some areas of the constitution are extremely colonial in nature, and so you obviously as a lawyer and someone who's obviously curious about the law as well, you wonder what those parts are, how they can be removed, and what is it? Is coloniality so deep inside my head that I'm not able to gauge what parts of the constitution are so deeply colonial and why are they colonial? So why is JST making that claim? And he has not spelled that out in too much detail. So he's hinted at certain things, for example, secularism, deeply colonial concept. But he doesn't go into too much detail on why the constitution or constitutionalism, even for that matter, or constitutional morality is something that is colonial in nature, or why it shouldn't be upheld as the supreme principle within which all Indian jurisprudence operates. So those questions remain unanswered, and the strangest part is that talks on constitutional morality and constitutionalism are like very much happening today by the highest court of the land, and in many of its judgments the verdict has actually pivoted on the basis of constitutional morality and constitutionalism. So these concepts should have been explained a little bit better, and also actually more than the concepts being explained themselves, I would have liked to see I would have liked for him to dumb it down for me, because not everybody is as well read as he is, and I think he just presumed that you have a certain basic level of knowledge when you're reading his book. So I think that if he's marketing it to the public as such, I would have liked to see his case for why constitutional morality should not be upheld as this like religious principle, or why the constitution itself should not be upheld as this religious book which can never be changed, or whose principles are absolute. So secularism was a revelation for me personally. Yes. Yeah. All right, guys, this is the end of today's session. Thank you so much for joining in, and I apologize for the Zoom. I know it went in and out. But you can check out the recording, and the whole thing's, for smooth reading, if you want. And I'll see you guys next time whenever we choose to do another live stream on YouTube. So good night and bye. Take care. And bye bye. Bye. See you guys.